Shavata, Shalom on the Sabbath day. Welcome to the Philadelphia Assemblies. Let's see, today is the 11th day of the 6th month, the month of Elul, of the year 5780, as we discern the sacred calendar, or Yahuwah's calendar. Today is also the 12th of September, 2020. So again, welcome to the Philadelphia Assembly. We are going to do the book of Esther today. I'm going to expository teach the entire book. They're short chapters. Don't see a real need to break it up. Couple of comments. Excuse me. There's really no "Thus saith Yahuwah" in the book of Esther. Matter of fact, there's many question why it was added to the canon. Okay, because of that. I believe it's a more historical book. This is just my opinion. If you got a different one, that's not a problem. Okay, that it should have been in the Apocrypha and not in the actual canon of the Scriptures. And my reason for that is the real meat of the book of Esther is about the Feast of Purim. Okay, and it's not a commanded by Yahuwah. It's not a feast that's commanded by Yahuwah. You'll see that in context. Mordecai, him and Esther proclaimed the feast of Purim, much in the same way as the Maccabees, Judas or Yehuda Maccabees declared the feast of. Man, my brain's fogging up today. Hanukkah. That's the word. I'm sorry I have a problem with that. We don't keep that here at the Philadelphia Assemblies, and a lot of others don't either, because it's not found in Leviticus 23 or Deuteronomy 16. Okay? That doesn't mean I'm judging you for keeping Purim, no more than I would judge you for keeping the 4th of July. I myself choose not to keep those things because I'm a foreigner. I'm a sojourner in this land. I'm not a real, obviously I'm a citizen of the United States of America, but my allegiance is to Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem that's going to be coming down. So we choose not to keep the Feast of Purim, just like we don't keep the Feast of Hanukkah. We don't keep any feasts that are not found or commanded by Yahuwah in Leviticus 23 or Deuteronomy 16, and given by the mediator of the first covenant, which was Moshe. Okay, so that's why we don't do that. But because it is in the canon, and I don't know all things, I'm going to expound upon it to the best of my ability. Okay, as the Ruach HaKodesh gives me the words to say. And again, good book, a lot to learn, just like there would be from the Maccabees in the Apocrypha. Okay, doesn't mean that they're not worthless. They're all good, for edification, but it's not "Thus saith Yahuwah." Nothing in this book. It's just a recordance of a historical time and setting forth a feast, okay, that wasn't commanded by Yahuwah, but it does say with all those that sojourn among them. We'll read that as well. So, but again, putting that out there right before we get started so you know that. I'm going to turn towards the east, where the temple was in Jerusalem and where it's prophesied to be again. Almighty Father Yahuwah, we thank you and praise you in all things, Father. And again, even in this terrible pandemic, this plague that's upon the whole earth, we also praise you. We praise you for your hedge of protection, that we're still with you today, Father. We try to keep your word. We try to use common sense, too, and not expose ourselves to things that could kill us, Father. Just as Shaul, when he reached, in the book of Acts, when he reached down into the fire and got bit by the snake, he didn't know there was a snake there. He wasn't trying to be bit. Just as our Messiah said in Matthew chapter 4, we are to live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yah, but we're also not supposed to tempt Yahuwah or Elohim. And putting ourselves in harm's way is not showing ourselves to be faithful, that's still showing ourselves not to be wise. So, Father, we'll follow the laws of the land here as far as me and mine, and we'll wear a face covering, we'll wash our hands, we'll do everything we can in our power not to be affected by that plague, and we'll trust in you that you have a hedge around us. Father, as we go to the Word today, to this Scripture, we ask that you would enlighten us, Father. Give us that extra unction of the Ruach HaKodesh as we read the book of Esther. Give us understanding and why it is in the canon, Father. Help us to understand, and also let us discern that unless it comes from the mouth of Yahuwah, which is the Ruach HaKodesh, then we are not commanded to keep those things. Now, again, I'm not going to say we can't. I'm just going to say we're not commanded to do so. So again, we ask that you would bless us and give me the words to say, Father, and help this book be edifying. We ask it all in your precious Son, Yahushua. Amen. Okay. Esther, chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus. This was added right here to the end of this verse. From the word this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India, even all the way through Ethiopia. So that's where his kingdom was at the time. Over 127 provinces, like we would call states. Okay? Verse 2. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, was in Shuhan, the palace. In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes. Okay? This is Ahasuerus. He made a feast unto all his princes. Okay, those that were heads over probably all these provinces, like governors we'd have today. Okay? So he made a feast unto all those and his servants, and the power of Persia and Media, which is the Medes and the Persians, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him, or under him, under his rule. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty, many days, even 180 days. Okay? And when these days were finished, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan, the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So he set up his own feasts. Okay? And just like the United States set up the 4th of July and Thanksgiving and many other feasts that are on there. Doesn't mean that that's a bad thing necessarily. It just means that those are the feast of man, or the traditions of men, and not the commandment of Yahuwah. Okay, so he set that feast up. Okay, verse 6, where were white, green, blue hangings. Okay, hangings is an added word, but the colors of those things that were hanging, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon the mosaic pavement. Okay, pavement. Of red and blue and white and black and marble. That's what they were on. Verse 7. And they gave them drink in cups or vessels of gold. The vessel, this is added here to the word another here. The vessels being various, one from another. In other words, they differed. They weren't the same. And royal wine in abundance according to the standing of the king. In other words, his commandment. And the drink was according to the Torah, to the law, his law. Okay, not the Torah. That's why I started to misspeak, but it's because I was thinking about that. As according to his law. And it said there was no compulsion. Okay, so in other words, nothing was mandatory. There was no compulsion. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure, according to his own pleasure. So there really wasn't things that are mandatory, if you understand. When you do something according to your pleasure, you do not according to the law or to the Torah when we're talking about Yahuwah's commandments. But here this was talking about his commandments. He said, just like when we do the feast, we're supposed to satisfy our pleasure as long as they're not corrupt as far as Torah is concerned. And the same there too. But there was nothing mandatory during this feast. Verse 9. And also Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry and merry with wine, he'd had a lot to drink. He'd been drinking throughout the whole feast. Okay? He commanded Mehuman, Bizath, Harbonah, Bigtha, and Agabatha, Zereth, and Carcass, the 7 officials that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, or with the royal crown, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. Okay? But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains, or his servants. Therefore was the king very angry, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men which knew the times, now this is added from here on, and I'll let you know when we finish. For so was the king's manner, or his custom, toward all that knew the law and judgment. Okay, he's talking about the Torah there when he's talking about the law and judgment. Verse 14, and the next unto him was Karshina, Shethar, and Adamatha, Tarshish, okay, that's an area, Mers, and Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which the king's face and which sat the first in the kingdom. Okay, that's what they're talking about. These are all the heads of the states that he was talking about earlier that sat in the heads of the kingdom. That's the end of the add there. That's the end of the parentheses in my King James anyway, showing me that was all added so you'd know who they were talking about. Verse 15, what shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law? Okay, for not following the king's command. So obviously they're talking about the law of the land here. Because she have not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by his servants or his chamberlains. Verse 16, and Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti, the queen, hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all those that are under him, his leaders, and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. Verse 17, for this deed of the queen shall come abroad, in other words, be heard outside the country in other areas unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti, the queen, to be brought in before him, but she didn't come. Okay? Verse 18, likewise shall the other women of nobility of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed, or what she had done, the queen had done, thus shall we arise to much contempt and anger. Okay? Verse 19. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from you, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes. So that's the law we're talking about here. that it be not altered, okay, or changed or repealed, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her position unto another, that is better than she, that does better than she is what it implies, okay? Because she disobeyed the king's commandment, okay? Verse 20, and when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all his empire, now this is added all the way to great, for it is great or large, telling you that. All the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes. And the king did according to the word of Memucan, for he sent letters unto the king's provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own household. In other words, the husband is over the wife. And that is according to Torah. That doesn't mean he's to lord over her, as some would put it, but that he would, and she would at least acknowledge what he said, which this Queen Vashti did not do. Okay? And that's what they were worried about, that the wives would rebel. Okay? That every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. Chapter 2. After these things, when the anger of the king Ahasuerus was appeased, in other words, he'd been satisfied, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that minister unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. So actually what was going on was he was missing Vashti and her female companionship. That's what it's saying. Okay? And his servants are saying, bring out good-looking virgins and you'll forget all about Vashti. That's what they're saying. Is that right? No, but that's what they said. Okay, verse 3. Remember, this is the Medes and the Persians. This is not Yahuwah's people. Okay? Then said the king, okay, verse 3, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan, the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegi, the king's chamberlain, or official servant, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. And let the maidens which please the king be the queen instead of Vashti. Notice what it said there? It says, and let the maiden select one to replace Vashti. Okay? And the king the thing pleased the king. And he did so because he was lusting for female companionship. Okay? Verse 5. Now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Yehuda, someone from the kingdom of Yehuda, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, that's right, Yair, the son or the ben of Shimei, the ben of Kish, a Benjamite, okay, of the tribe of Benjamite, same one Shaul in the New Testament is a member of, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Yehuda, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up, or reared, Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. Okay, they weren't living, that's what that means, not that she was without descent. And the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and her mother were dead, took for his own daughter. Mordecai took Esther for his own daughter. Verse 8. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. That was his position. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, which such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens to serve her, which were fit to be given to her out of the king's house. And he prepared her and her maidens unto the best place of the house of the women. Okay? Esther had not revealed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. In other words, didn't let her know that she was from Yehuda, the people of Israel, okay, or Israel. Verse 11, and Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Now when every maid's turn was come to go into the king Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of women. Well, you know what that tells you. For so were the days of their purification accomplished, that it is 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Again, this is according to the traditions of the Medes and the Persians. Verse 13, then thus came every maiden unto the king, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. And in the evening she went, and on the morrow, or the next day, she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of Sheazagaz, the king's officer or official servant, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. In other words, if they called her by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken for her his daughter, in other words, he picked her up and raised her as his own, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Hegai, the king's official servant, the keeper of the women, advised. He didn't do anything that wasn't advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus, unto his house royal, in the 10th month, which is in the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Ahasuerus. Verse 17, and the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti, or Tai. Then verse 18, the king made a great feast unto all the of his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release or a holiday, okay, like we would have holidays, not holy day, to the provinces, and gave gifts according to the commandment of the king. Okay? And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, when Mordecai sat in the king's gate, Esther had not yet revealed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had instructed her. For Esther did as she was instructed by Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. In other words, like her father. Okay? 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, unto the king's official servants, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which guarded the door, were angry and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. Verse 22. And the plot was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof, or made him aware, in Mordecai's name, or on his behalf. And when the investigation was made of the matter, when an investigation was made of the matter, it was found out thereof, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Now they're talking about the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Medes and the Persians, not the book of the Chronicles that we studied. Okay, chapter 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the ben of Hammedatha, I'll get that right, probably never, the Agite, and advanced him and established him above all the other leaders that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did bow, nor give him reverence. Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's commandment? Why do you not obey the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he listened not, he didn't listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai words would stand. For he had told them that he was of the Yehudim. Okay? He had told them that he was of the Yehudim. We know that's going to not go well. And he was disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore, or for this reason, Haman sought to destroy all the Yehudim that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai, his family. In the first month, that is in the month of Nisan, or we would say Abib, but at this time they were out of captivity. Notice now how the names that Yahuwah gave them, this would be the month of Abib. Now they're talking about the month of Nisan. So they're picking up the traditions of the land. So notice that with the naming of the months. But we know that this is in the first month of the year, which was Abib. They say Nisan. In the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur. That is the lot. That is the lot. Okay? You know how you cast a lot? That's what they're talking about. Okay? Before Haman, from day to day. That's where the word Purim comes from, that we're getting to that. Okay? So, I am on the end in Hebrew shows plural, meaning more than one day of Pur. Okay? Before Haman, from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is in the month of Adar. Okay? Another Babylonian name for the months that's added here. And from here on, adopted, I would say. Verse 8. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your king, or of your kingdom, and their laws are different from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws or commandments. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to let them remain. Trying to get them pushed out. But remember, Esther's got her foot in the door already. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that carry this out of the business, to bring it unto the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Haggite, the Yehudim's enemy. That's who he was. He was their enemy, and he was voicing it out. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. Then were the king's scribes or secretaries, those that wrote things down, called on the 13th day of the first month, Abib, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus, was it written and sealed with the king's ring. So he says, so it's written, let it be done. Verse 13, and the letters were sent by couriers unto all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all the Yehudim, both young and old, little men and women, or not ben here actually, that's the other Hebrew word for children. This is talking either sex. And women in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, which we talked about earlier, and to take the spoil of them for a plunder, a prey. Now, sometimes in Yahuwah's calendar, there's Adar number 1 or the 12th month, and then the 13th in Adar 2. Okay? This is talking about the 12th month here. Verse 14. The copy of the writing for the commandment, or for an edict, to be given unto every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day, or ready for that day. The couriers went out, being hurried by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan, the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was confused by this order. They were confused. Chapter 4. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came as far as the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. Okay? And in every province, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Yehudim and fasting. See, this is where the days of Purim come in, because they were this command to kill all the Yehudim. Now, obviously that's not going to happen. Yahuwah's going to stay that. But does that mean that he's commanded this feast? Those are things you have to get in your own heart and mind, okay? And weeping and wailing, and many laying sackcloth and ashes, many of the Yehudim, because they were threatened to be destroyed, okay? So Esther's maids and her servants, or her officials, came and told it her. Then was the queen very grieved, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. He wasn't having none of it, because he was in mourning for the Yehudim. Verse 5, then called Esther for Hattach, one of the king's, again, officials or servants, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, or to wait upon her, and gave a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. They just trying to stick together. So Hattach went forth to Mordecai unto the open square of the city, which was before the king's gate. Verse 7, and Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasury for the Yehudim to be destroyed, or kill them. Verse 8, also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to order her that she should go in to the king to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. Yehudim. Verse 9. And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And again Esther spake to Hathach and gave him orders unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's province do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come into the king, unto the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the gold scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that you, or don't just think of yourself, that you shall escape in the king's house more than all the Yehudim. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall there be relief and deliverance arise to the Yehudim from another place, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed, and who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Yehudim that are present in Shushan, and fast you for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. So 3 days and 3 nights. Don't eat. Days of Purim. People, that's what this is. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go into the king, which is not according unto the king, which is not according to his law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Chapter 5. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, or opposite the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, opposite the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden sepulchre that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the sepulchre, or the scepter. I'm saying that like a tune. It's a scepter. We all know what a king's scepter is. I apologize. Verse 3. Then said the king unto her, what will you, Queen Esther? What do you want, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Or what do you want? It shall be even given you to as much as half of the kingdom. Of course, she doesn't ask for that. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is your petition, or what do you want? And it shall be given to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. So he's letting her know, just about anything you want, I'm going to give to you. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition, and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. Then when Haman went forth that day, joyful and with glad heart, but when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation, or anger, or hatred for Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained from himself, contained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches, and all the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above all the princes, or the like governors and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yes, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself, and tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. Yet all this avail me nothing. This doesn't mean anything to me. This isn't going to do anything for me. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So long as I see Mordecai of the Yehudim sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak you unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged on it. Then go you and marry with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Chapter 6. On that night the king couldn't sleep. And he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. Book of the Chronicles of the Medes and the Persians. Okay? And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's servants, or officials, upper servants, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity have been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there is nothing done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman stands in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than himself? Because he's a narcissist and got a problem with himself, okay? He's not a good man at all, okay? He said, who else could be honored except me? That just shows his arrogance, okay? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king used to wear, and the horse that the king rode upon, and the crown, and the royal crown which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, leaders, that they may array or dress the man withal whom the king delights to honor, and lead him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Then the king said to Haman, make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as you have said, and do even so to Mordecai of the Yehudim, that sitting at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delights to honor. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then said this wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, if Mordecai be a descendant of the Yehudim, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, the king's officials and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen, and the king said again unto Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, What is thy position, Queen Esther? And it shall, petition, not position. What is thy position, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we were sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for slaves, for slave men and slave women, put it that way, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not balance the king's damage. Then the king of Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that dare presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The foe or the adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king arising from the banquet of wine in his anger went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen. For he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. The king had decided to do harm unto him, is what he's talking about here. Verse 8, Then king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also with me in the house? Will he force himself on the queen with me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbana, one of the chamberlains or the officials or the high servants, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who has spoken good for the king, stands in the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him on it. Verse 10, So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath satisfied. Chapter 8, On that day the king Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman the Yehudim enemy unto Esther the queen, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears, or begged him to put away the mischief of Haman and the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Yehudim. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reserve the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Yehudim which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king, Ahasuerus, said unto Esther the queen, and unto Mordecai of the Yehudim, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Yehudim. Write ye also for the Yehudim as it pleases you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan. Okay, that's the month that's been the name that was given by this time after they came out of Babylon, for the 3rd month, on the the 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Yehudim and to the lieutenants and the deputies and the rulers of the provinces which are from India unto all the way through Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and unto the Yehudim according to their writing and according to their language, which is Hebrew. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Yehudim, which are in every city, to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people in the provinces that would assault them, both little ones and women, to take plunder of them for a prey. Take possession of them for a prey or plunder. Verse 12. Upon one day in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the copy of the writing of the commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Yehudim should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the couriers that rode upon the mules and camels went out, being hurried and impelled by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of the blue, white, and with great crown of gold, and with the garment of linen, fine linen, and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Yehudim had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Yehudim had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Yehudim, for the fear of the Yehudim fell upon them. They adopted their beliefs because they were afraid from the Yehudim. Chapter 9. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same month, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Yehudim hoped to have power over them, this is added to the end of the verse, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Yehudim had rule over them that hated them. Verse 2. The Yehudim gathered themselves together in the cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as thought their hurt, their harm. And no man could withstand them, for the dread of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants, and the deputies, and the officers of the king helped the Yehudim, because of the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became greater and greater. For this the Yehudim struck all the enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughtered and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated or despised them. And in Shushan, the palace, the Yehudim slew and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandatha, and Dalphon, and Apatha, and Portha, and Adala, and Aradath, and these names are tough. Verse 9, and Parmash, Tub, and Ariza, and Ardai, and Virgisatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Yehudim, they killed. But on the possession laid they not their hand. On his possessions they didn't lay their hands on his possessions. On that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was reported to the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Yehudim have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition, and it shall be granted you? Or what is your request further, and it shall be done? Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Yehudim which are in Shushan to do tomorrow as according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 men be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 men. For the Yehudim that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the plunder they didn't put their hand, they didn't take the plunder. Verse 16. But the rest of the Yehudim that were in the king's province gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000, but they laid not hands on their possessions. On the 13th day of Adar, on the 14th day of the same rested day, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Yehudim that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Notice they did. That's the most important to get out of this. Therefore, the Yehudim of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month, Adar, a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and sending presents one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters unto all the Yehudim that were in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both near and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and the 15th day the same yearly. Which is, who did that? Who commanded that? Mordecai. Okay? Mordecai is a good man. I'm not saying anything negative about him, but it's not Yahuwah. Okay? He's not, I'm not, you're not. Okay? Verse 22. As the days were in, the Yehudim rested from their enemies, and the month which was returned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning unto a good day. And that they should make days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions, or sending gifts, one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Yehudim undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them. It's no different than, what I was saying earlier. And, it's no different in Hanukkah. Same way. Not ordered by Yahuwah. Because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agite, or the Agite, whichever you might think it's pronounced, the enemy of all the Yehudim, had plotted against the Yehudim to destroy them, and had cast Purim, or lots, that is the lot, to destroy them, and to destroy them completely. Verse 25, but when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that his wicked plot, which he had devised against the Yehudim, should return upon his own head, and that he and his men should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these the days Purim, okay? After the name Pur, which means casting of lots, and because it's plural. There are therefore for all the words of this letter and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come into them. Okay? And the Yehudim established and took upon them and upon their descendants and upon all such. Notice what it says. The Yehudim ordained or established this feast and took upon them and upon their descendants and upon all such as joined themselves unto them. Okay? That would include the sojourners or the mixed multitude that would be with them. But notice who the commandment came from. It comes from Mordecai, okay, and not Yahuwah. So that's the reason why we don't keep it. Not that we don't revere Mordecai from reading this book, we do, but he's not Yahuwah. So as it should not fail, stop, that they would keep these 2 days, that's why it's per M, okay, these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year. And that would be no different than us naming the 4th of July as a year we keep every year. And that these days should be remembered. Now, why do we have the 4th of July? Because that was the day this country was ordained upon, but also because many people died to establish that. This feast was ordained because many people didn't have to die. Now, Haman's people died, but the Yehudim didn't, and that's why they named it. So see the similarities. Not saying it's a bad day, I'm just saying it's not thus saith Yahuwah. And that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation. Okay, and they are still, every family, every province, and every city, that these days of Purim should not fail among the Yehudim, nor the memory of them perish from their descendants. It's not perish from my memory, I just don't keep it because Yahuwah didn't command it. Okay? Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai of the Yehudim wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. So there's where the authority comes from. Okay? Mordecai, not Yahuwah. And he sent the letters unto all the Yehudim to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth to confirm these days of Purim, their times appointed according as Mordecai of the Yehudim and Esther the queen had commanded them. Okay, it says enjoined in the King James, it means commanded them. And as they had decreed for themselves and for their descendants the matters of fasting and their cry or their lamentations. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book, this book of Esther. That's where it was written. And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king raised him, or lifted him up. Are they not written in the books of the chronicles of the kings of the Media and the Persia? That's where they're talking about throughout this book, when they're talking about the book of the Chronicles. They're not talking about the book of Yahuwah's Chronicles. For Mordecai of the Yehudim was next unto the king Ahasuerus, and great among the Yehudim also should have been there, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking good of his people, and speaking peace to all his descendants. That's the end of the book of Esther. And we hope that you were edified by the reading here today, and that you understand I'm not condemning the days of Purim. If you see fit to do that as your tradition, more power to you. but it's not thus saith Yahuwah. It's not one of the feasts that's recorded in Leviticus 23, so it's not the feast of Yahuwah. Okay? May you be blessed until we meet again. Also, don't forget to go, if you're not subscribed, and push that subscribe button, mash that notification bell, and give us a like for this video if you like it. And may Yahuwah be with you until we meet again.